Okay, as you can see, we mainly raise Black Angus cattle. There's a few white faces in there. This herd mainly is our second calvers. Okay, there's some older ones in there as well. But for the most part, it's the ones that have their first calf on them. Now, we had an issue with this herd in particular with breeding back. We had, the rest of the herd was probably at about 7% open when we would pregnancy check, and this herd would be like about 30 to 40% open for about 3 or 4 years. So we knew we had to do something. It wasn't just a bull problem for 1 year. So we decided, and it was recommended maybe to try some distillers to add some energy, to add more protein and energy to this herd. And we did, that's the main thing we've switched up. We switched up a little bit of the grazing as well. And it has made a really big difference for us. We do the distillers about a month before breeding and then through breeding. And then that's it. Mike knows more about how much we give them. But we daily just dump it on the ground like this. Of course, they can smell it and find it. And it has taken our pregnancy down to, I think,
last year it was down to 17% open.
yeah, 17% open last year, right?
Right, yep.
So it has helped solve that problem for us. It works for our operation. I know a lot of people would think differently, but this is the only herd that gets those. And it's, you know, we feel it's a worthy investment because it's for a shorter period of time and with it making that big of a difference. So I guess that's what I've got.
On the dry distillers, we're feeding 1.25 pounds a day to each cow.
Every day?
Every day. 30 days prior to breeding and then all the way through breeding. Our breeding is for 60 days.
When do the bulls go in?
July 7th. We started April 15th. Yep.
You want to talk about this one, Bert?
I can.
You have at it. Why don't we tighten the circle up some, just so if you are asking questions, we can hear them better and all that.
If we would have called them out, our herd was getting older, the cows that we had left. So by doing this, our herd, we can keep, you know, a younger herd, or try to get back to that.
So did you say this group is all second calvers?
Yep.
And
And there's some older ones, late calvers that are in here
But
probably
when you were talking about 30% breed back, that was specific
Yeah.
to
to
the
this group.
The second
your
calver.
Second,
the
yep.
second
No,
calvers.
let's make sure we understand what you mean by second calvers. They're being bred for their second,
Second calf, yep.
Right.
So they're
For
first calvers
calvers,
right now.
yeah.
Right.
First calf at side, okay.
Yep.
Well, I know several people using the same wrinkle you're doing with pretty good success, and I managed a ranch in Nebraska for a good many years, and I'd switched from calving in the wintertime to calving in April, and that was a pretty nice move, and nothing bad happened, and a whole bunch of good things happened. And then my successor got caught with, I'd had 2 April blizzards in 18 years, and he got caught with 3 in a row, and he said, we're moving to May. And he did it all at once, and then all of a sudden his cows wouldn't get pregnant, and he found that he was having to do what you're doing just prior to breeding and calving. And another thing he'd done is he'd let the cows get bigger. And so I think there's a combination of things. I'm just one that I'm really, really high on fitting a cow to an environment so that you don't have to help them. You know, you help the land, you help the ground, and then that takes care of the cows. But, you know, on a select group of cattle, strategic supplementation, sometimes $1 spent can bring $10, $15 back. But I guess my personal preference and prejudice probably is that over time I would want to modify the cows so I didn't have to do that. And that they would get pregnant as yearlings and they would rebreed as 2-year-olds and do that with facility. You know, another factor in there is heterosis, and the certified Angus beef people did a wonderful job of completing their mission. but they did some disservice to the industry. And one is that they made the industry think that black was beautiful. And there, frankly, are other colors that work. And they also got us to going to straight Angus. And heterosis is such a wonderful tool for fertility and survivability. Those traits that are somewhat lowly heritable and heterosis just really helps with that. And so those are probably the comments I'd have just right now, that I like to make cattle that are adapted. And now it's hard to pull. I think when you pull crutches, you have to pull them a little bit at a time, or you can have a big economic hit, which, 30% open is a big economic hit. And so if you were to start to pull crutches, you'd have to do it kind of little by little, and then the cows that get pregnant, when the crutches are pulled, they're the good cows. That 70% that did get pregnant, they were the good ones. The 30% that didn't, they weren't as good. And if you can begin to remove those that don't work, and then make sure that the bulls you buy don't undo what you've just tried to fix. And I'm really particular about how you buy bulls, because a lot of times you're trying to do something with your cow herd, and then you go buy bulls that undo what you're trying to do. And I think you need to be careful with that.
Everything he said, I agree 100% with. On our cow herd, we were trying to fit basically a 12 to 1,400 pound cow onto our clay soils there in mid-Missouri. And, we custom grazed cows for 7 years for other people before we ever owned a cow. I didn't have the money to buy any, so we used other people's cows. Got paid to do that. And I noticed that these cows that we were running for other people, we had to supplement them. If you didn't put breeder cubes to these cattle in the middle of summertime, they'd come back 30-40% open. And I'm like, why do we have to feed a cow? It's a herbivore. If you're on grass, why should we have to feed these cows to get them bred? And it all came back on our farm. We found out, we started our own herd. I'm like, I'm just gonna, whatever makes it out there, they're gonna make it. Whatever doesn't, we're gonna sell it. That was 16 years ago. Today we've got a 1,000-pound cow. Folks, if I get over 1,000 pounds on any of my cows, they just fall to pieces. They can't take a calf and breed back on grass if I get them bigger than that. So what I did is I let my soil type pick out the correct size cow from my farm. And my neighbor, he's got 1,400 to 1,600 pound cows, but he feeds grain all winter long. He's the one that made the comment, I made $30 on my calf. He thought that was good money. How do you pay your bills on $30 for a calf? Can't do it. So we've got to get animals that can make a living. And so I have a structure on my cows. If I can put a newspaper underneath her belly and read it, she's got too much leg. I'm serious. Learn to hate leg on the cattle. That's high maintenance. And the other thing I've knocked down is milk production. You can tell a cow that milks a lot, they get thin. And those cows that put out a lot of milk, I don't want anything to do with them. They got to leave. We're in the beef cattle business, and the hardest thing to produce on grass is milk. A little bit of milk, that's good, and that calf needs to get on that grass. So
Let me interject one thing. Most of you don't know, but it's obvious. The conversion of grass to milk to pounds of calf is a horrible conversion. That's grass to milk to pounds of calf. Terrible conversion.
much better to do it with forage. And so, I have a problem, we hear the beef cattle industry complaining about the chicken industry, how you can feed, 2 pounds of grain to a chicken and you get 1 pound of meat. Man, we got to feed 7 in beef cattle, 7 pounds of grain to get 1 pound. We've got a herbivore. What are we doing? We've got an unfair advantage. You can't feed a chicken grass and get an egg. What are we doing? We've got a beautiful solar energy collector animal, and we're complaining because we got to get him marbled in the feedlot? Why? We're grinding 60% of our beef into hamburger. Why do you got to get it marbled? So yeah, forage, that's where it's at. Focus on animals that can make it on forage alone, and you and your family's going to be pretty well off. This is a wonderful business to be in when you get the right size animals.
You may or may not know it. I've been hitting this hard the last 3 or 4 years on the speaking circuit. There is a direct relationship between cow size and ranch profitability. Unfortunately, it is a direct inverse relationship. The bigger you make a cow, the less profitable the whole ranch is going to be. What Greg was saying about 1,000-pound cows and selecting them to your environment, Bert, said he wants to fit the cow to the environment. I concur 100% with those approaches. But the idea that a bigger, more productive cow is more profitable is a fallacy that the industry took us down for 40 years. It's exactly the opposite. I'm going to speak in a hypothetical now about how do you get those animals. And when I do individual consultation, sometimes the worst part of my job is when I have to tell a cattle producer, a cow-calf operation, that really they have horrible cattle. And they have almost no chance of being profitable until they change the type of cattle. So, speaking hypothetically, if there were a breed that became so immensely popular that the seed stock producers from that breed, rather than keeping only 20 to 25% of their male calves to become bulls, which if you want to make genetic progress, if you are actually looking for superior cattle, in my view, no seed stock producer should ever retain more than 25% of their male progeny and make them into bulls. So if we had this hypothetical breed where there were seed stock producers who were keeping 70 to 80% of their male progeny to become bulls, what does that do with the advancement of truly superior genetics? And especially if you are doing selection for traits that actually negatively affect profitability, what is that going to do to the industry? It is not going to help it at all. As Bert said, CAB, the most successful beef marketing program ever, in my view, has also been the program that has done the greatest disservice overall to the quality of beef cattle in America. Walking by, it was really nice that the cows walked by here. I saw 2 cows out of the group that went to water that, kind of fit what I'm looking for in a cow. What Greg said about legs, I've never heard you say that one about the newspaper, but that's good. We look for 2/3 for really functional female beef cows. You can't have male beef cows. Though a lot of the city people will, call that
A bull.
a bull. Yeah, that's a daddy cow. We like to see of their total height, 2/3 of the height and body depth, no more than 1/3 in the height contribution from legs. You don't find a lot of cattle like that. You have to work towards getting there. The cows, red tag 10 and a red tag 15, total weight wise, they're not outrageous. But those were the 2 cows I saw walk by here that, there's 10 over there. I don't know who this red, and I think that's 15 back there. 16, she's got just way too much leg, shallow body depth, so there's not, a lot of room and capacity there, grazing capacity. But we used to put them in chutes and do the linear measurements and do it. What I have found, if you're looking at cows now, I just snap a photo of them and then put it on the computer screen and measure that body proportion so you don't have to handle them to do it. But once you start looking at your cows that way, and for the body proportions, you find most people don't have cattle that really meet that criteria. Another thing that's important that you do have to put in a chute to measure is the heart girth to top line ratio. So if we have a cow who's standing here, what the top line is measured from the top of the pole to the vertical end of the rump, not the tail head, but you know actually put a level on them to get the vertical end of the rump. That's the top line, and then heart girth is measured the circumference of the animal just behind the shoulders there, and we want the heart girth to be at least equal to the top line and preferably longer. Each inch of heart girth that you add to an animal that exceeds the top line, that's 3 to 4% increase in retail meat cutout. If you are in the direct market grass-fed beef business and you can generate 10% more cutout meat per animal, that is a huge. And you do it by making them fuller through the body.
Jim just talked about cow size being inversely proportional to ranch profitability. Smaller cows make ranches more profitable. There's a whole bunch of reasons they do that, and I won't take time to go through those unless you ask questions about it. But Dr. Lohman down at Oklahoma State University did a fairly extensive study in cooperation with several other researchers, and they looked at cow size and in relationship to the weaning weights of their calves. And they found that for every 100 pounds increase in cow size, they got someplace between 5 and 17 pounds of additional calf weight. To maintain another 100 pounds of cow body weight was costing about $40 a year. 17 pounds of calf doesn't pay $40. Especially when the weight of the calf goes up, the price goes down. And so that's just some research that backs up what Jim has just told you. And I think those are important relationships we need to learn. I can just tell you this: if you breed a lot of your heifers, I don't like to cull any except just the out-and-out dogs. Breed a lot of them for just a short period of time, they get pregnant, and then after that you sell every late calving cow. It's amazing how pretty soon your cows start looking alike. And I say it this way: tell them what you want them to do, and then let them look however they need to look to do what you want them to do.
Again, cow size, there's been a study done, and just re-quoting Teddy Gentry's. He's kind of a data hound. He's scratched a lot of this. I think him and Alan Williams maybe put some of this together. But for every 100 pounds of weight that you go over 1,000 pounds on a cow, you lose 2% fertility. So if you go from 1,000 to 1,500 pounds, there's 10% fertility across your whole herd that you lost. If you're selling just by weight, two 1,500-pound cows equal 3 1,000-pound cows. They're going to eat the same amount of forage, but you've got one more calf to sell. In Missouri, when it rains a lot, we have to worry about tearing up our pastures with bigger cows. With smaller cows, they don't tear up your pastures near as much. You don't get the pugging, so there's an advantage there. The lighter weight cows always wean a higher percent of their body weight than a big cow. So there's just some things to be said about watching your frame and the size of these animals.
Greg, well, you got the microphone. You talked a little bit in one of your videos about fly traps, and I want you to touch on that before you leave. You don't need to do it now, but if you'd like, I'd like to hear it.
The question was on fly traps. What am I talking about on cows and fly traps? Some of your cows were going to have flies all over them. And I call that cow a fly trap. That's a cow that didn't shed off properly. She's not performing on your farm. She's thinner than the rest of them. Her calf is not going to be doing as well. That's a fly trap. Just get her out of there. Because all she's doing is generating more flies that are going to attack the rest of your good cows. So a cow that slicks off and gets that winter hair coat off, you can count the flies on those backs, but some of them, there'll just be flies all over them, all over their head, all over their back. You don't want that. That cow's not making you any money. Just get rid of them. So that's what we call a fly trap.
In the last 25 years, the average cow size in the United States has increased about 350 pounds. The average weaning weight has only gone up 20 pounds. this same line that Burke was talking about there. Now, when you look at feed conversion, and that's, we need to think about not our weaning weights, but our beef yield per acre. And the beef yield per acre is what ultimately, we talk about the fence development, the stock water development, interseeding pastures, any of that. It's additional animal product per acre that pays for all of those investments. And so as you lower the feed conversion from, as I said, we've added 350 pounds of cow weight in 25 years and only 20 pounds of calf weight. That's the sort of thing that makes it harder to pay for these investments. You get a functional size cow, you get the good percent of body weight wean per cow, your carrying capacity in terms of animals generating pounds of saleable beef per acre goes up, those infrastructure investments become more affordable. It is, it's one of those things that it took me a long time to realize that you will pay for your infrastructure investments with the optimal cow a whole lot faster than you will with the type of cow that most of your neighbors are running.
Great. Tell us a little bit, too, going back to the flies, tell us a little bit, too, about some of the work you've done with the birds.
Yeah, the question was, what are we doing with the flies? And we've got several things that are helping with the flies. One is, first of all, very slick hair coat. Oily animals. What else can we do to help them? Well, we move our animals fast. A fly that hatches out of a manure pat, it doesn't travel much more than a couple hundred yards from where it was hatched. If you leave those animals on that paddock for 7 to 10 days, you can watch the fly load build in that herd. So if I was moving cows here, I would want to move them away from this paddock. If you got a lot of load on them, you can just get them away from it. That removes a lot of fly load instantly. It'll give them some relief. The other thing we've done is we've put up 450 tree swallow houses across our farms. We've got 16 farms. They're all within 5 miles. And we've got tree swallow houses everywhere. Well, the tree swallows, an adult pair will eat 8,000 flies a day. Now, I don't know who counted those flies, and I don't care. But I can tell you this, if you put up a house, by God, they'll be there. And they live out here. You've got to put them out in the open, in these fence rows, someplace where the cows can't rub on them so much. But we move our cows so fast, I even put them out in the pasture. And I'll see a cow that's rubbing on one, but they're not there very long. So that's nature. We're trying to use nature as much as we possibly can. We don't dip. We don't use any ear tag, fly tags. We've never wormed. And Ian, the guy in Africa, was talking about taking the crutches out from underneath our cattle. You've got to take the crutch out and let those animals behave the way they can on your forage. And I'll say this. I don't know what size cow belongs on this farm, but I'll tell you this, without any inputs, over 7 to 10 years, maybe not even that long, your soil type will pick out the right size weight of cow for your farm. And that's what we've done. We took out all the crutches, and we found out a 900 to 1,000 pound cow is about right. Up further north, up here, you may be a little heavier than that. I don't know, but I know down in Texas, their white-tailed deer are about that big. A little bitty deer, and they're trying to run 1,800 pound cows. I'm like, what are you all doing? It's killing them. It's absolutely killing them. So, yeah, the further north you go, you're going to need a little bit bigger frame cow than down in Texas.
Greg, have you had problems with pink eye in the past, and do you still have problems?
The question was on pink eye. We used to absolutely get hammered with it. We would get 30% infestation in our calves every year, and it just, it's awful. Had some calves go blind. And we started moving the cows faster, focusing on the top parts of the plant, getting more energy through the cattle, higher palatability, better digestibility, not letting the plant get quite as mature, moving the cows faster, higher selection. slicker hair coats. Folks, in the last 2 years we haven't had one case. Not one case. Out of over 400 animals, there's not a single animal that's got pink eye. Now, what is that? Yeah, part of it, I tell people, we've got to be the predator in our herd. We don't have the lions and the leopards following behind, picking off the cattle that don't perform. But as owners of our herds, we need to take those animals out. So the animals that don't slick off, get rid of them. The animals that don't have a calf in 12 months, get rid of them. The ones that are thin, why are they thin? And the rest of them are all fat. I don't know. Get rid of them. You've got to pick out the animals that work in your environment. And you are the predators. Don't name your animals. I'm serious. You can't call Bessie because it's Bessie. No, Bessie needs to go to town. She's got flies all over her.
Would you say the same for foot rot as pink eye?
Absolutely.
Same.
Get the cattle out of the ponds. We don't let animals in our ponds. What are all these issues that we're having to doctor animals for, folks? An animal doesn't get sick if they're on fresh, clean forage every day. News alert. They don't. They don't get sick. And that's because we're not hanging around the feces. We're not making them eat around their feces. We're not eating down the lower canopy. Folks, the lower you eat that grass down, the more parasites there are. The parasites are hanging down on that ground floor. If you shift your focus up to the top of your plants, higher selection, those animals aren't going to pick up parasites. So there's just a lot of good grazing practices. Burke and I have all the regard for Jim Garish, folks. He's the one that got me going. I was doing everything wrong, and I went to his class in Linnaeus back in
About 92.
92, and I tell you, it flipped my world upside down. I didn't know anything. I gave my farm all the cattle, the whole farm. I wondered why I was out of grass every year. And this guy starts talking about rest and recovery. It works, folks. It works.
One thing I'd like to add to that is, for years and years, I was cows first, and then when I started hearing about better grazing, then it was grass. And finally, way late in life, I started thinking about soil, and boy, it needs to be soil first. And a couple of years ago at the Grass-Fed Exchange conference out in Georgia, Fred Provenza gave 2 talks. Fred Provenza is an animal behaviorist and good. I mean, he researches, he's a lifelong learner, he's professor emeritus now. You wouldn't know he's emeritus because he continues learning, and he's a keen observer as well as a very good scientist on animal behavior. And he brought a whole bunch of facts and ideas and thoughts together that demonstrated to us that the healthier the soil, the more variety you'll have in the soil and in the grasses, in the plants, and in the insects. And when you start to get big variety in the insects, the disease organisms become prey to a lot of those insects, and they just don't proliferate. And he shows how healthy soil makes healthy grass, healthy plants, and healthy plants make healthy animals. And then healthy plants and healthy animals make healthy humans. But I think that's the reason that when we get our grazing going well, and the soil health gets better and better, that the animals get healthier too, and you have less of those problems with the prey things. And the predators aren't wolves and coyotes very often. The predators are usually insects out of control.
I've got one more comment tying into what he said. People talk about you use animals to control problem species, whether it's bush, weeds, or whatever. You can, but if you're going to use animals as a tool to put some pressure on unwanted species, you've got to do that for a very short period of time. And I made that mistake. I had a cocklebur field, and it was a big one. I was making the cattle eat the burrs. And, they ate them. But guess what happened in about 5-6 days later? Some of the cows started limping. I'm like, what in the world? Why are you all limping? Well, I limited them. Those cows didn't get any really good feed for about 3 or 4 days. A good steady diet of burrs. And I was patting myself on the back. I thought I was doing a good thing because they ate the burrs. Folks, as long as you have weeds and you stay focused on weeds, that's all you're going to have is weeds. Focus on what you want. So the beneficial plants that are coming up in the weeds, make sure you just take the tips off and move. Your beneficial plants can put some pressure on the weed. So when's the most vulnerable time of a weed in its entire life? Small, when it comes up in the spring. Well, the cocklebur comes up June 1st. What was I doing? I was going in the cocklebur field in early spring and grazing it like the rest of my pastures. I removed the canopy. The birds got sunlight and here they came. So the next year, I just completely went around that burr field, and guess what? The good plants shaded out the burrs. I put some pressure on them, and today, there's no birds in that field. So graze for what you want. If you want good grass, don't overgraze that good grass and move. And it'll put pressure on some of these weeds that we're looking at out here today.
Questions, comments?
If you're trying to develop a good herd in heifers, how many days do you generally put them in? Like 30 days, 45, 60?
With yearling heifers, unless they're running with the cows, and I usually segregate the yearling heifers to breed. I started out like most of you, 60 days or so, and I moved it much slower than I care to admit to 30. And once I was at 30, the guys calving heifers said, don't ever breed them longer than 30 days again. They liked that calving season. But then we started working from 24 to 30, and it depended on season and year and what we thought we wanted to get bred in those heifers and so forth. But boy, when you do that for 3 or 4 years, pretty soon the 2s and 3-year-olds are breeding better, I'll guarantee.
I want to come back to weeds just for a bit. We've been so I manage one unit of a larger ranch, and that's where we actually live. We manage that just in exchange for living on the property, and then we own a smaller place. And we have a lot of spotted knapweed. We have a lot of yellow toadflax there. And when we moved to Idaho, and with the laws for invasive weeds, you're supposed to control those. So the first few years I was there, I actually sprayed it. Now the 22 plus years we are on our farm in Missouri, I never once sprayed a weed, never used a chemical. Did it I think 3 seasons in Idaho. And, I looked across the fence at the neighbors who've been spraying for 20 to 25 years, and they still have the weeds over there. And it really bothered me doing the spraying, so we quit that and started trying to manage it just with the grazing. And this is going to tie a number of different themes together. So we started custom grazing replacement heifers for a neighboring ranch, a different ranch. And when we did that, I started out doing 3 and 4 moves a day at 300 to 400,000 pound stock density to force those animals to eat the knapweed. And they started, they got better and they eat it well. We probably went 3 or 4 years and they never took a bite off of the toadflax. And then they started eating toadflax. And remember, this is replacement heifers, so a different set of animals each year. But they're always going back to the same herd, and we're getting progeny eventually out of those heifers. And now, so we've been 10 years that we've been grazing the heifers for this other ranch, about 40 heifers a year, that's all we're doing. And the owner says, yeah, it's amazing how his cows eat knapweed now. And we only move those cattle once a day now, and a lot of times I see the heifers come into the pasture, and the first thing that they are eating is the flowers off the knapweed. So we have created now multiple generations of cows from this ranch who are weed eaters, and we don't have to do anything special now when we get their set of heifers up. We usually get them kind of tail into June, and they go in and they just start eating the weeds. So you can build animals that are weed eaters, and I will say we started out not doing the right thing because we were forcing them to eat that, and so all of our desirable grass got grazed severely doing that, but we only grazed it once a year. It's a flood irrigated patch. We have spring high water, so we basically have one shot at growing a crop and grazing it. And so I was managing against what I didn't want, but now we don't have to graze as severely to get the knapweed eaten. And the research that's been done says if you can graze knapweed from late bloom through full bloom, you'll reduce seed production by 90%. And so that's what we're working towards. And a lot of Fred Provenza's work was around the generational learning of eating undesirable plants, and that you could get cattle to do that. And so, we got the real life illustration, and it's the coolest thing now to see those heifers come into the pasture and just immediately start eating knapweed. So we have changed the type of animal.
Jim, what you've done there, you've got a fetal imprinting effect or an epigenetic effect. That calf in embryo is getting primed to come back and do that.
Yeah. All this theoretical stuff that the researchers do, some of it actually does work.
Can any of you just touch a little bit on weaning and your thoughts on weaning calves and what kind of direction you go?
We started doing pasture weaning at the research station in Missouri in 1985. I left there in 2003. We did not do cross fence weaning at the research station because we have 25 to 30 small herds of cows on different research pastures, and you can't do every set of calves separate. So the calves all came to central pastures, and we would sort 4 ways: big heifers, big steers, little steers, and wean on pasture. And in the either 17 or 18 calf crops that we did that way, over, I think, 3,600 calves, something like that, we had 2 sick calves at weaning. Not 2 a year, not 2%, but over that 17 or 18 years, 3,500 some calves, we had 2 calves sick at weaning. So I'm a big fan of pasture weaning. On our own farm in Missouri, we did cross fence weaning. On pasture, cross fence, and we'd have the cows and calves next to each other for 3 days, and I would manage the pasture so that there would be adjacent recovered pasture that after 3 days, we'd move the cows this direction, the calves this direction, and just work them away from each other, and again, everything stayed healthy. And occasionally, if we were going to have an animal cross the fence and get with the others, it wasn't calves going back to cows, it was cows coming to the calves, and it was generally a first calf heifer who would come back for her calf, and you just sort them out a couple times and they're fine. So I'm a big fan of cross fence weaning on pasture.
Yeah, I'd say amen to that. I really like cross fence weaning if you can do it. And if you're calving, say anytime from mid-April or later, the closer you can get to 10 months of age to wean calves, the better I like it, and for a lot of reasons. A calf weaned in mid to late winter just weans way, way easier than a younger calf. And the next thing that happens is that cow has been able to teach that calf how to eat a lot of the plants in the environment that calf will readily go to and regard it as feed, and doesn't have to learn from its herd mates or something else, but just knows how right away. So that's what I'd say about weaning. Now, I know there's times you can't do it, but boy, I have people tell me you can't do that here, but you don't have to drive very far to find somebody that's doing it. and doing it pretty successfully, you know. There are times the things won't work, you know, that some of us suggest, but some of these things you just need to give a try. I mean, I just knew fence line weaning was not going to work at our ranch when the guy first introduced it to me. He says, well, let me try it. And I said, okay. He tried it and it worked.
I hate to even bring this subject up because everybody here's going to think we're nuts, but we don't wean. We haven't weaned for 13 years. We did a cross the fence weaning, and I loved it. Rest in peace, Gerald Fry. You know, he always talked about you should make a cow work 12 months out of the year. And he said, why are you taking the calf off at 7 months? He said, that cow should be able to take that calf through the winter on her back if she's any cow at all. You're paying interest on her, why don't you make her work? And I'm like, well, I don't think my cows can do that. And so we did exactly what Bert did. I mean, we left the calves on for 10 months. We weaned them the 1st of March, and finally I told my wife, I said, I'm done. We're not going to wean anymore. And she says, it's going to be a wreck. I'm like, well, it may be, but we're going to try it. And so the first year we did, we had probably 15-20% of the cows. When they calved, they let the old calf come in and suck, and you see 2 of them out there, and boy, I mean, they'd be out there with a stick. Oh, man, you talk about making you hot. So, you know, 600-pound calf sucking, and there's a little baby. I mean, boy. Make your blood boil. And so we started calling on that, and I tell you, one herd. Those calves go through that winter on that cow, and that cow's not giving very much milk, just a little bit. But we don't have to supplement that calf because we didn't wean it. And there's a lot to what Bert said. Those cows kind of teach those calves what to eat. And through the winter, it's just, the darn calves just come through the winter really good shape. And this is what separates your high milk. I didn't want to cover this earlier. That's how we find our high milking cows. You go into your cow herd into March and you haven't weaned the calf off that cow, you can pick out the high milkers. Those are the ones that have the ribs showing. Because they're giving too much milk. In the dormant season, there's no green grass. The cow's going to get thin because she's milking too hard. So that's kind of what we do, and I'm going to stop right there.
Greg, how many generations or how many years of culling for those cows?
How many years and generations? We continually cull. We had, this year we probably had 3 that still let the calf suck. And that was a question, that was a concern that I had too, was when the mother has the new calf, is the baby even going to get the colostrum? Well, what's a cow do when she calves? She leaves the mob. You know, she's over here to the side. And so it's one-on-one. There's something else we don't do. We don't tag the calf on the day it's born. We always tag on the 2nd day. I like that mother-calf bonding time. Don't go in there slapping a ear tagging that calf. You can catch it on the 2nd day, maybe not the 3rd, but the 2nd day you can. And let that cow be alone with that calf. So yeah, it took 2 or 3 years, but the first year was the bloodiest. I mean, I culled some cows. Yeah.
When you said you went through the winter with that calf on the cow,
Yes.
what kind of temperatures are we looking at?
Right, exactly. I'm glad you brought that up. The temperatures, what are we looking at? In Missouri, our typical winter looks like the daytime temperature is probably 20s, mid-20s, maybe. We can get some temperatures. Well, Jim, you live there, up north Missouri. We can get below 0, but we'll get a spout of that, but we're not going to get a month of it. And so, yes, we're not getting the winters you have up here in North Dakota. I'm not sure I'd do what I'm doing if I lived here. I probably wouldn't, because your winters are a lot more severe. Yeah.
There's guys in,
that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up.
there's guys in Canada who do it, in
There is?
Alberta and BC.
There's guys in
Yeah.
North Dakota that do it too.
Okay.
But the guys in Alberta, that's a whole different country than where we're at.
Yeah.
We're north of here, and this is a whole different country than where I'm at too. When you get north of 94, it changes. And those guys in Alberta, yes, you're right, Jim. They do it. But if you look at their seasonal weather map, it's a whole lot different than what we are. We're closer to Brandon. So we get that Brandon temperature, and that's a little different.
The Brandon,
hard.
Manitoba? Or
Huh?
what, Brandon what?
Brandon, Manitoba.
Brandon, Manitoba?
I'm not saying you can't do
Yeah.
it, because I think you
Yeah.
can. But
But you gotta have the right type
you
of
gotta
cow.
have the
and
right
you
type of
better
cow to
have-
do it.
Be
And
well
you gotta
planned.
have the forage base to do it.
Here's the deal. Who's taking the yearlings away from the white-tailed deer? Is there somebody out there yanking them? Well, there's people, yeah, people shooting them, but I mean, who's taking them? Who's weaning those? So it happens in nature, and Ian goes back to saying anything that doesn't calve in 21 days eventually gets eaten by a predator in nature. Why do they get eaten by a predator? They don't breed. They get too fat. And when the stampede comes in, the predators, the fat ones get picked off. And so everybody says nature's friendly. Well, no, she's pretty brutal. If you don't work, she just kills your ass. Okay?